Hello everyone, I hope you're all keeping well, healthy and happy. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about life. In particular, the existential crises which occurs in every individual's life. You reach a certain juncture at which you begin asking the fundamental questions such as, who am I? What am I doing here? Where did I come from? What is my purpose? Right? And this can happen during childhood or adulthood as you journey forwards in time. Now, I was reading an interesting story just a couple of days ago about this little girl who asked her mother, she said, if my father was not my father, would I still be me? Now, that's a very profound and interesting question. But in the times that we're living in today especially, what happens is adults dismiss that. The obvious answer to that from the materialistic perspective is no, right? But this reveals ignorance on the part of adults. Why is this ignorance prevalent? Because adults have been conditioned into an infantilized state, weirdly enough, where they repeat behaviors and patterns of behavior, okay, over and over and over again. And this thing that they do is called adulthood. It's a complete nonsense, of course. But this is what adulting, as they call it in today's times, is all about. Really what's going on is that adults are just playing a game. They don't realize this themselves oftentimes because they've conned themselves into thinking or believing that what they're doing is far more valuable, is far more important in some sense. Right? Like when you wake up in the morning and you go to work and you do what you need to do at work, most people literally think they're saving the world. The fact of the matter is they're not. Okay? 9 out of 10 times, there will be those instances where this is not the case. There are real jobs where you actually have to do something that will impact folks at a greater level. But 9 out of 10 times, you're actually just playing through a role. And I'm going to get to that in a second. Right? But these adults who think they have a good beat on things, who think they have a handle on it all, when really they don't know the first thing about themselves, are telling children, in a lot of cases, that this is nonsense to ask that sort of question. Because at the heart of that question, okay, the question that the child asked, which was, if her father was not her father, would she still be herself? At the heart of that question is an implicit acknowledgement that there is more to the self than merely the material or the physical or the sum of all those physical parts. Okay, and that includes all of it, by the way, including this squishy stuff in the head called the brain. One of the worst myths, that is to say, a complete falsehood that has been perpetuated, is the idea that you are your brain. Okay? And the reason for this is because the way in which the brain itself is described is that it's that mushy stuff in your skull. Now, if it was truly explained to people, then perhaps it wouldn't be so bad. That is to say that your brain is not merely just this mush up there inside the bones of the skull, but also throughout your body. Every nerve ending. Okay? And even the various organs that exist inside your body. Think. Now, this sounds bizarre and strange to a whole lot of people because they haven't kept up with the latest findings in physiology. And they certainly don't understand the brain-gut connection, the bacteria that live in the gut, and so on, the mitochondrial DNA, the mitochondria themselves have a direct connection to your brain. Right? To your conscious brain as well, incidentally. But folks don't know this stuff. Right? They've been kept in the dark about a whole bunch. What is acknowledged as science today is actually pseudoscience. It's not true science. And people are taught lies, total fabrications, or outdated material in various areas as being the absolute truth. And that's a very dangerous thing to do in society, and this is done through the schooling systems primarily. Okay? They give you this absolutist interpretation of the world. They tell you that this is what it is. A great example of this is in chemistry class, okay, where they tell you that this is an atom, this is what an atom looks like. The nucleus and then the electrons, and the nucleus is comprised of protons and neutrons and so forth. That is the atom. Of course, we know today that this is complete hogwash. There is no physical structure called the atom. That thing that the teacher draws on a blackboard is merely a representation. It's a representation, but they are forcing kids to accept that the representation is the reality. A representation is designed to convey an idea. Okay? It's designed to convey an idea about the particular form and function of whatever it is. Okay? It's the same thing in physics. They'll show you a drawing of a wave and say, there's electromagnetic waves, this is what they look like. Waves don't look like that. You only see that in oscilloscopes and other various measuring devices, let us say, right? But that is a representation also. Things don't literally travel as waves, and we know this today as well, by the way. This is acknowledged in the field of physics. Okay? We call them waves because waves accurately, insofar as the definition in physics is concerned, it gives us a relatively accurate model with which to work. It's an accurate enough representation. It describes the behavior of the thing. Okay, but in true terms, that's not what the thing itself actually is. And this is the garbage that's perpetuated. Right? Now, if you get to a high enough level in education, then much of what I'm saying, your university lecturers in the STEM fields might actually start to tell you. But sometimes even there, in fact, most times they won't do that. You're very, very lucky in real terms. You're very lucky if any person who is in a position of teaching or has any learning actually shares that with you. That most things that are taught to you are just representations of a representation, sometimes even. Okay? Underpinning most of these things are mathematical formulae. But the mathematics is abstract. It's a language to describe the thing, right? That's another great example. It's like language as well. Language is an abstract means of communicating ideas. It's a representation of something that actually, in some cases, doesn't even exist. So it's a representation of a representation, and this is why languages go through so many variants and interpretations and misunderstandings, mistranslations, and so forth. Right? I mean, there's a lot to this stuff. The central point being that these are the people that are telling children that the questions they're asking are nonsense, when they themselves believe total, utter hogwash. Okay? You see, reality itself and our perception of it. I talked about this many moons ago now, but reality itself and our perception of it is it's completely different to our understanding of it is completely different to what it actually is. And this is a very important point that I've been wanting to get across, but I keep forgetting to tell you guys this. There are at least 3 forms of truth. Okay, and folks get confused about it. There are at least 3 forms of truth. Okay, I'm going to tell you what they are. You have your subjective truth. That is the inner truths within you. These are oftentimes based on your intuition or your feelings. Right? Those are not absolute truth. Okay? Those are not absolute truth. They are true for you. That doesn't make them true for everybody else. The second type of truth is objective truth. These are the truths that are generally acknowledged by the greater populace. Okay, they're the truths that are accepted by any given number of people, a group. Okay, now, those objective truths themselves are also not absolute truth. Okay? And after that, there's ultimate truth. So you've got subjective truth, objective truth, and then ultimate truth. Ultimate truth is unknowable. Anyone who tells you otherwise is a liar. They are lying to you. Okay, if they tell you that they can explain ultimate truth to you, they're either a very good con person or an out-and-out charlatan. Or they don't know what the hell they're talking about and are probably crazy. Ultimate truth is unknowable. Okay? The best you can hope for is to get a glimpse of it through your subjective understanding paired with objective reality, and thus you can... It's a little bit like a blind man getting a sense of something through the sense of touch. Okay? That's literally what it is. You see all the colours that we see, that's due to our optic nerves. But we perceive them as complete reality. Unfortunately, because of our inherently solipsistic nature to some degree, we end up thinking that our way of seeing things is the only way to see things. And when that becomes an agreed upon landscape, let us say, then, you know, there are all these things that stem forth from that, which may not be ultimately true. But they're good enough for us to use. So we make them objectively real in our minds. And by the way, our perception of objective reality also gets interpreted subjectively. Okay? So, there are 3 types of truths. And only 2 of them are knowable. An objective truth actually uses systems of measurement. Okay, you're using systems of measurement, observation, to clock those, to note those. But those themselves also get reinterpreted into subjective reality in your mind. Now, your mind is not your brain. That's another thing. Your mind is not your brain. Your brain does the calculations. It's there to do that. Some have posited that it's a holonomic processor. But your mind is far more than that. Okay? Your mind also consists of the metaphysical aspects of you. If you want to call it the human spirit, you can do that. Okay? Now, again, materialists would reject that. And the reason they reject it again is because they've been fed horseshit. They've been fed pseudoscience. Right? This is stuff that has been... What I'm telling you here has been kept hidden for thousands and thousands of years from humanity. Okay? They've been told all this garbage, and they've swallowed it hook, line, and sinker to a point where they've gone into complete nihilism. Which is what very clever people who sequestered this knowledge wanted. Because it produces a state of suffering in human beings, existential crises. See, when you have an existential crisis, you suffer. Because you're longing for answers. And the true answers have been ripped away from you, and in their place are these artificial answers that are put forward to answer your queries. Right? These false personas, these facades. Incidentally, the word persona, it comes from the Greek, such as in the case of dramatis persona. I don't know if a lot of people out there know what that means, right? But that's a false mask, a character that is presented to the audience, okay? It's a role that is played. It's played out. And in the same way, this thing we call society that has been shaped for us, and not in the healthiest of ways. See, human beings naturally form societies. They form into groups and sets and all this business. But what you're seeing today is actually a complete manipulation of that. We've got completely manipulated groups. Designations that you must fit into. Right? Which you cannot voluntarily leave. It's very, very bizarre stuff. But that's how you know it's artificial, because you don't have the voluntary choice of whether to be a part of that group or not. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this, such as, for example, your ethnic group. You don't choose that, right? Your the language you speak or what have you. But if you're clever enough and if you're wise enough, right, and I'm not talking about the intellect here, as I was explaining before in my previous video, intellectual arrogance is dangerous because that is also a false frame of thinking. Okay? But if you are wise enough and able enough, you can actually transcend a whole bunch of these barriers, as I explained once before. The wise can transcend any barrier. If you want to learn a new language, you can learn a new language. You can go to another country, speak their language, and it's very possible they'll accept you into their group. Okay? Transcendence. The wise can transcend. See, that's another piece of occulted knowledge that has never been given to people. Anyway, getting back on point. The human being, as I was saying, is far more than the sum of their parts, but they're told to put on these masks. It's a masquerade ball out there. Okay, and these personas, the roles that we play out, are actually to our detriment, because it becomes nothing more than a game, a false game that is played for the acquisition of money, for example, right? Or for the acquisition of currency, more properly, for the acquisition of toys. And I'm not just talking about, kids' toys here. I'm talking about all kinds of toys. Fast cars, fast boats, whatever the hell it is. Okay? These trappings of wealth, as they're called, are nothing more than a means to trap you inside your own egotism. Within your own expectation, well, not even your own expectations, within other people's expectations of what they think you should be. Okay? So, it's detrimental to the being of a person. That's what I'm trying to explain. Well, persons to the being of an individual. And I would say that the being of an individual is spiritual. It's the spirit. It is metaphysical. And there are many metaphysical sciences that you can study as well, and you'll start to find wisdom in those if you look hard enough. You know? And this is not some mumbo-jumbo garbage that I'm telling you here. I'm telling you factually that you can break this all down logically and come to the same conclusions. But this is mostly a facade. Now, when a human being experiences an existential crisis and these artificial things are put in front of them as salves, through advertising, for example, and marketing, sales pitches, persuasion systems, you name it, okay, propaganda, whatever it is, it doesn't suffice. This is why you find that when people are told that buying a particular thing will make them happy, then they buy it, they're not happy. It hasn't really added anything to their life, to the quality of their life. So it becomes this endless search. And all that's happening throughout at each point is that the control mechanisms, these mechanisms of manipulation, keep presenting to you new things to try. And they never work. They never address the underlying question, the issue. Okay? Drinking Coke, for example, and I'm not encouraging people to go out there and drink Coca-Cola or whatever the fuck else, right? Drinking Coke is not going to tell you who you are. Drinking Pepsi isn't going to tell you who you are. In fact, those kind of things will probably really damage you physically, but that aside, right? Because these kinds of new products that are out there in foodstuffs are actually quite dangerous for people as well, for their well-being and their health. But I'm not going to talk about that here. The primary point I'm making is that the lifestyle that accompanies all of that crap doesn't address the underlying questions of your own existence. It won't do that. Okay? You can buy the most expensive car on the market, whatever it is, the Lamborghini, Ferrari, whatever. And you'll notice that it has an effect on the people around you and how they perceive you. Obviously. But how you perceive yourself actually doesn't change all that much. It doesn't change all that much. Because the next day you're still faced with the same questions. And the pursuit of pleasure can only be pursued so far. Until it gets old real quick. And then, beyond that, what do? Well, you look for the next big thrill. Right? Because what's happening is that you're looking for verification and validation from other people and things. Material goods. That doesn't, by the way, everything I'm saying doesn't mean that all material goods are bad. On the contrary, they can actually be quite good for you. But they won't answer the fundamental questions that you have about yourself. They are not capable of doing that, right? Another thing is, governments can't do that either. Okay, I hate to bring up politics in this, but that's also quite important. When you have these existential crises and you see, rightly, that other people are suffering in this world of ours, you start crying out for answers. Why is this person suffering? That is actually a metaphysical and existential question. Say you have plenty, Okay, let us say that you've got plenty, and you see someone else in a state of real suffering because of malnutrition, because of hunger, because of water shortages or whatever else, which is actually happening in South Africa right now, and not a lot of people are talking about that. But say you see that and, you start wanting answers. Governments won't give you the answers, but they start looking to authority figures which are false authorities. They're not true authorities. They're false authorities. And the governments can't give them the answers. Because governments lie. That's their job. Okay? The whole point of government is actually to control you. To keep the populations in line. There's a whole lot more to it than that, but I'm just giving you a general understanding of this if you don't already know. Most of you probably will, though. That's what government does. And if it's not governments people are looking to, it's corporations. And if it's not corporations people are looking to, all these material avenues, they keep going to them, thinking they can provide them with answers. But they can't, because all these institutions are bereft. They're bereft of value. Okay? They do not have that which you seek. So where do you find the answers? Now here's where it gets scary. Here's where it becomes frightening. There's only one place you can find those answers. And that's within yourself. And that's the scariest thing you will ever do, is examine yourself. To look within. Okay, and I'll tell you why it's daunting. Because there are parts of yourself that you don't even know exist. Or that you haven't consciously acknowledged. Okay, that's why it's terrifying for people. And just doing that, going on that inner journey, as it were, that is not an easy task, because you have to face up to certain realities about yourself, about the actions you've undertaken, good or bad, and the implications of all of that. And there's another thing you have to deal with as well when you go through this process. Are all the voices in your head, and I'm not talking about voices in a schizophrenic sense. You see, your psyche is shattered into many, many parts. This is what this society does, by the way, right? If you were living in ancient times, this would not have happened to you. You would have a singular inner voice speaking to you with clarity. And people who go through psychotherapy, by the way, have that, and if they're successful in undertaking that journey within, what happens is they also emerge with that singular voice speaking to them. Right? But in this screwed up culture of ours, in the West, and in the East, and in third world countries like Africa and so on. It's all the same everywhere, by the way. In all of these places, there are fractured personalities. And there are reasons why that's the case, which maybe I'll go into at a later point. But, that is damaging. Because you've got all these voices telling you things, and they're not your voice. They've almost been implanted into you through television, for example, through the media, through, as I say, corporate advertising, right? All these things are going through your head. All these voices are popping up. All these sound bites are there. But you don't know where they're from. And you mistakenly think that they are part of you. And this is why I said earlier on, right, in the previous video, you are not your thoughts. Okay? These thoughts are just there because they're passing anyway. They're not permanent. But because people think they are, and because people mistakenly assume that most of these voices in their mind are them, they get perturbed by that. And they end up in distress. It causes them all kinds of suffering. It really does. And they're horrified by themselves when they don't realize that actually isn't themselves at all. Don't get me wrong, there are actual parts of yourself which are equally as terrifying, but, I'm talking about these false, fractured personas that live in your head. In this consumerized culture, in this media-saturated culture. See, if you grew up in the West, you have no understanding of your authentic self at all. Okay, and it doesn't matter where you're from. If you grew up in the West, you'll have no authentic understanding. In any cult, any religion, any government, any corporation can come and assume control of you. You will then be under total mind control. And there is no helping you at that point if you haven't tried to do any kind of work on yourself. If you haven't at least tried to address these existential questions which you have had at some point in your journey. And this is what causes the depression. It's what causes all these personality faults, let us say. Okay? Which develop things like narcissism, egotism. And I'm not talking about having a healthy ego. I'm talking about ego out of control. Vanity, intellectual vanity, physical vanity. Okay? That happens as well. Arrogance. Now, arrogance is an interesting one because sometimes what people assume is arrogance actually isn't. Sometimes you can have somebody very wise who knows a lot of stuff and they come off as arrogant. But that happens because your subjective worldview can incorporate that wisdom into it. So it's easy to label someone as just being arrogant. But equally, there is real arrogance out there where there are people that genuinely think they are superior or better than someone else. When that other person that they are measuring themselves against hasn't done anything immoral, hasn't done anything that is worse than them in any way, shape or form, and may actually in fact even be a better person. But the prejudices that people hold, the biases they hold, can be profoundly damaging. So you have to answer these existential questions properly. And, you have to find systems and tools to do that. One of these, as I mentioned, is psychotherapy. Most people in the West actually need therapy. They don't know this. They're out of their fucking box. Okay, they're out of their minds. They are completely insane, but they don't know this. And that's a very sad thing to see. Most people that are alive today, the majority, are batshit Looney Tunes. They'll believe in superstition. They'll believe in false pseudosciences. They'll believe in religions. They'll believe in government. They'll worship things without being able to justify why. It's crazy stuff. Then there's the belief in nothingness. The people at the top of the food chain, right at the very highest point of it, the black nobility. Now they don't believe in anything. And I don't mean religiously. I mean, they genuinely don't believe in anything at all. They believe in total nothingness, which is why they're completely nihilistic. It's a sick kind of way to look at the world. But they see themselves as being imprisoned by the constraints which exist, the natural constraints which exist in this world. And so they'd much rather end it all. It's actually kind of suicidal. And it's bad news for all of humanity because these people are running the earth. But hey, never mind that for a second, right? The thing I was talking about is the lack of ability in current times in modern people to acknowledge their true selves. And the ruling elites, let's call them, right? The people at the very top also have this. You see, they shaped this earth, this planet, into what they wanted it to be. They shaped the people in their image. That is why you're seeing so much psychosis, so much neurosis, so much narcissism. All of this is rampant, and this is the reason why. Because those people actually are know-nothings. They know nothing at all. They've thought themselves superior for so long. But they have no true understanding. And I don't just mean in the brain in the mind. They have no true depth of understanding, no knowledge, no nothing. All they've got are material worldviews, literalist worldviews, because they cannot comprehend the depth of true reality. Remember we were talking about absolute truth. Well, these people are 1,000,000 miles removed from that. In fact, they don't even believe in objective truth. They're subjectivists completely. And that is also what you're seeing playing out on the world stage. Individuals all experiencing existential crisis, all in a state of mass suffering, all in dire straits. And they're crying out for answers, but nobody's willing to give them to these people. You've got people like me out there that are telling you all of this stuff that's been, as I say, sequestered and hidden away from people, but we're very few in number. And incidentally, people don't want to hear it. The mass of people just do not want to hear it. They are comfortable. In this very weird way, they've become comfortable in their ignorance and their own enslavement. It's horrendous to see this. It's horrifying to see this, actually. That this kind of masochism has erupted in people. They want to be abused. I mean, this is sickness. But not many people want to travel down that path, as I say, of true understanding. Not many understand any of the mystical traditions. Not many understand the true origins of science. Not many want to understand the scientific disciplines in the real sense. They just don't want to do it. So what can you do? People want to live in ignorance, for the most part. That doesn't mean that everyone does, which is why I guess I'm sitting here talking about it with you guys, because obviously, if you're watching this, you probably want to know. But those inner truths will answer those existential questions for you. They're not objective truth in the strictest sense. Although you will find an overlap between the subjective and objective when it comes to trying to answer these questions, but it won't be absolute. Right? But there are tools and ways to embark on this journey of self-knowledge. You know, the ancient traditions. How do you kill your ego? A lot of people don't know this stuff. How do you kill your ego? I'll guarantee you, most of the people that talk about ego, right, or egotism, even in a psychological sense, don't understand what ego is or how you go about mastering it. Or master anything, actually. How do you gain mastery over yourself? Because that's the only thing you can have mastery over, by the way. It's the only thing you have ownership of is your physical self, and by extension, anything that you claim as yours, which you have a rightful claim on. That is to say, it doesn't infringe on the well-being or the rights of others. That's also yours. You know? But, again, this is stuff that most people just don't want to know. But that's why it's so important to actually address the existential part of who we are. The metaphysical part. Because, as I say, it's far more than what you're being told. And the ability to know from a metaphysical point of view is, I would say, probably superior to the simply material. You know, but that doesn't, that's just my point of view, that's my opinion, that last part. But each person has to find their own way in this life, and most people sadly can't or don't. They're too afraid to. They're also afraid of what will happen if they go off the beaten track. Because like I said, in adulthood, most people get stuck in these ways and modes of thinking which are static. They've gotten caught up in this thing called progress. That's a misnomer. You're not progressing anywhere. You know, technological progress or even politically to be progressive. Well, we've all seen what that has brought, right? Progress is not what you think it is. This forward motion through time doesn't necessarily mean, that's all progressing is, by the way, to move forward, doesn't mean that's a good thing. Where are you moving forward to? Nobody asks that question, do they? Right? It's like we're surrounded by insane people in an insane asylum. The lunatics are running it. You know? Just using these words doesn't mean anything. Oh, it's progressive, it's progression. To what? Sometimes maybe actually going backwards might be quite a clever thing to do if there's danger ahead. But nobody, see, that's a bad thing to say, to talk about going backwards. Right? That's seen as, oh, very negative. It's the stupid, insane, inverted garbage that's in our minds today that can't comprehend any of this. Today's progress is actually analogous with our own destruction, but folks can't see that. They're too removed from true reality, objective reality and absolute reality. They're too removed from it to understand even a tiny bit of it. But that's why there's a state of suffering. That's why these existential crises occur. We're not willing to acknowledge and address our true origins, who we are, the spiritual essence of human beings. We're not willing to do any of that. It's a mess out there right now. And this is, again, why I'm encouraging people to learn as much as is possible in a true sense. Understand more. Gain wisdom. Don't run around chasing after superfluous information or the accumulation of superfluous information just for the sake of it, because that's what our schooling system does. And it never really prepares people for life. Actually living. Schools don't do that. Colleges don't do that. Universities don't do that, right? None of these institutions prepare you for living. They are literally like mortuaries. All they're preparing you for is to live like the undead, to be dead within, to be dead. They're producing corpses that walk and are animated. They're not producing people that are living. That much is for damn sure. Because if that was the case, we wouldn't be seeing what the hell we're seeing in the world today. Anyway, those are just some of my thoughts on this subject. Again, I just thought I'd share these with yourselves because I feel they are pertinent to at least trying to get a handle on what is actually happening around us. What's going on. Because if we don't do that, those little pockets of hope, those rays of light, won't shine through the darkness, which is all pervasive right now. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for watching, and I hope you all have a great day. Take good care of yourselves, and God bless every one of you.